Good afternoon, dear friends. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. My name is Alex Mejia, and I will have the pleasure of representing UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Criminal Research. I am a division director at UNITAR and the deputy to our Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Nikhil Seth, who just presented his apologies because he will join us indeed, but he's stuck in traffic after a launch that was rather far, if I may say. But he will be with us very soon. And in the meantime, just to respect time and the busy agendas, and of course, because we will have also people watching from afar, allow me to give some very short opening words and then introduce our main host, the representative of York University. But two ideas very succinct, if I may. This side event of the High-Level Political Forum 2024 of the United Nations in New York, entitled Pathway to Resilience, Advancing Solutions for Global Freshwater Quality, is the result of a now long and successful partnership between UNITAR and York University in Canada. And I simply want to invoke those good memories that we are building in the last year plus to thank York University in the person of President Rhonda Lenton, who wishes to be with us, but last minute things happen. She's duly represented by Vice President Amir Asif, who will take the floor very soon. So we are very much thankful for the excellent partnership between UNITAR and York University. And the second idea, very succinct again, is to tell you that the support of UN Water, the guidance of UN Water, and the conception of what eventually became the UNITAR Global Water Academy has been a long-term process and the result of close partnerships with several organizations within the UN Water system, if I may call it. And of course, we have several representatives of the UN Water with us here today. This day started at 7:30 a.m., my God, with a breakfast. Thanks to our colleagues from UN Water, a very successful UN principals meeting. And I take this opportunity to congratulate our colleague, Federico Properzi, who is the person that actually makes this possible. Federico, it's an honor to have you guys here today. So those are short welcome remarks. And without further ado, I would like to invite to the podium Dr. Amir Asif, Vice President of York University.
Thank you so much, Alex. Merci beaucoup. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you for this crucial conversation on solutions to improve the resilience of freshwater systems. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Nikhil Seth and the dedicated UNITAR team for their unwavering support and commitment to tackling the global water crisis. As an institution, it has been a pleasure collaborating with the UNITAR team, in particular with Mr. Alex Mejia. Thank you so much, Alex, for your leadership. I also want to express my sincere appreciation for Professor Sapna Sharma, a distinguished member of the Faculty of Science at York University, a York Research Chair, and the pioneering director of the UNITAR Global Water Academy. Her leadership and dedication have made this significant event possible. Our vast planet, with 71% of its surface blanketed by water, holds a startling truth. Only 3% of this is fresh water, and a mere 0.5% of that precious fresh water is accessible for use across our 7 continents. This reality underscores the urgency of our mission to protect and wisely manage this vital resource. As we know, this challenge is not confined to developing regions. It is a global concern. Even in countries like Canada, access to clean water remains a critical issue, in particular for remote and indigenous communities. Research at York University has highlighted the challenges of water access in remote and indigenous communities with ongoing efforts to address them. As of 2023, many Indigenous communities in Canada continue to struggle with reliable access to clean drinking water. Even Indigenous communities close to major urban centers like Toronto face water insecurity. This ongoing water crisis disproportionately affects certain groups within these communities. Among the community members, women often shoulder the burden of water scarcity due to their roles in water collection, household management, and caregiving. Research shows that the impact is often multifaceted, affecting health, safety, and socio-economic conditions. In many Indigenous communities in Canada, water holds cultural importance, and Indigenous women play significant roles in leading efforts to protect water and the environment and upholding Indigenous rights. Their roles underscore the interconnectedness of social justice and environmental stewardship within Indigenous communities, as highlighted by research conducted at York University. In early 2023, 28 First Nation communities in Canada were under long-term boil water advisories, where residents are advised to boil water before using it for drinking, cooking, or bathing. These advisories are often a result of disease-causing microorganisms contaminating the water. This critical issue of water safety is not only a concern for the affected communities, but also a focal point for academic institutions dedicated to finding solutions. York University, a leading international teaching and research institution, is renowned for its substantial expertise in water research and safety, as well as its unwavering commitment to advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or UN SDGs as we often call them. This includes serving as the academic lead of the UNITAR Global Water Academy. This dedication has propelled York University up 5 places in this year's Times Higher Education Impact Ranking, placing it among the top 35 universities worldwide for advancing the 17 SDGs, as was announced last month. This commitment is a fundamental aspect of our academic mission. Our dynamic, diverse, and inclusive community diligently works to advance these goals daily, with a particular emphasis on SDG 6, clean water, and sanitation. Our primary goal is to build capacity and create innovative solutions. Our researchers are developing new tools to make water safer and are formulating science-based and governance strategies to address water issues in underserved areas. These efforts are focused on helping those most affected by climate change, flooding, and drought. To give you an example, in partnerships with Doctors Without Borders, York's Darley Institute Research Fellow Syed Imran Ali and Director Dr. James Obinsky and their team have revamped the Safe Water Optimization tool using artificial intelligence to ensure safer water in refugee camps. This tool precisely calibrates chlorination levels, effectively preventing waterborne diseases and improving health outcomes for vulnerable populations. Likewise, distinguished international researcher Professor Sathinder Barar and her team in the Faculty of Science are developing an enzyme-based technology for removing emerging contaminants such as plastics, chemical antibiotics, and pesticides from freshwater and drinking supply water. Anishinaabe scholar Dr. Deborah McGregor and her team are currently working on a 4-year project to provide a deep understanding of climate justice issues facing Indigenous peoples to propose viable approaches to achieve a sustainable climate future on Indigenous peoples' own terms. And graduate scholar Caroline Duncan, Professor Stephanie Gora, and Audrey Tan from the Safe and Sustainable Water Research Group at York University are leading a pilot water operator training program for youth at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Nunavut. This initiative provides practical training on water collection and analysis to build local capacity in water management. Key insights from the UN Water meeting in March emphasize the need for enhanced cross-sector collaboration, transboundary water cooperation, and a net zero water agenda. Progress hinges on strengthening capacity and expanding partnerships, such as those fostered by the UNITAR Global Water Academy. Supporting initiatives like the UNITAR Global Water Academy is crucial as it addresses the water sustainability crisis through training, capacity building, and research, ultimately informing decision-making and public policy. By fostering collaboration and sharing innovative solutions, we can leverage water as a catalyst for equality, health, and well-being, as well as advocate for peace and for protecting our shared world. Thank you. Mercy, miigwech.
Thank Vice President Amir Asif for his remarks. And we will begin a panel of distinguished panelists that will share their views on the topic of pathways to resilience, advancing solutions for global freshwater quality. The mechanics that I would like to propose is that we keep coming to the podium, so those connected or via video will be privileged from watching you as opposed to seeing all of us from afar. And with that in mind, the second thing is that you will all have between 7 and 10 minutes as you wish to deliver your message. And at the end, I will be very happy to moderate a short discussion. With that in mind, we will begin with the first panelist that I would like to invite to the podium, Mr. Federico Properzi, the Chief Technical Advisor to UN Water. Dear Federico, welcome.
Thank you, Alex, and good afternoon, everyone. So it's a real pleasure to join you, and thanks so much for inviting me. First of all, who am I? So I am I work in the UN Water Secretariat. We're based in Geneva and New York, and the head of the Secretariat. But the UN Water is not a UN agency. It's a partnership of 36 UN programs, funds, specialized agencies, working together to really advance SDG 6 and to work to solve the global water crisis. I would like to start with the importance of partnerships. Not only in the UN, outside the UN, multi-stakeholder partnerships, diversity is really something which helps us to move forward. So that's very important. Then I would like to link to what Alex was saying before about the fact that we had to wake up very early this morning. Thanks God, we are all jet lagged, so it is okay. What happened today? So today is a day when the United Nations system has presented its UN system-wide strategy for water and sanitation. It's a very long name. What does that mean? It means that for the first time in 78 years, that's the reality, right? There never was a system-wide strategy before this. The UN system has an additional tool in their toolbox, let's say, to work better together. And this goes back to the importance of partnerships, and I would say to the importance of defining a jointly owned framework that everybody can say, okay, this is my own, this is what I would like to use to work together with my other colleagues, inside the UN system, but also outside. So in this framework, capacity development, education are, of course, a main pillar of how we need to deliver the strategy, the main pillar of implementation. I mean, this is like so obvious, right? Of course, everybody's already working on capacity development, everybody's working on education. But what is the strategy, let's say the value proposition now is that this is something that can help connect and can help at all levels, at the global level, but also at the country level. It's something that colleagues in the UN country teams, but also outside, there are so many, international NGOs, local NGOs working on capacity development, education, that they can refer to and they can use to basically use a common language. This is some kind of Esperanto of how we work together. Right? And so with this, there is one thing that Nikhil said this morning, which really struck. So he said, always Nikhil has always this very clear vision. He said, look, we're working to create a hub, like a common UN hub for capacity development in education. So I hope that really this is one of the first steps together with others. There will be other colleagues who will speak that are also very much engaged, moving in the same direction. This is really something that will bring us all together. And I would like to finish with actually a question, Alex, point, because it's congratulations go really to all of you, like to all my colleagues in the UN agencies that really believed in this and worked very hard together to deliver. And so today is a big day. Thank you. Thank you.
The beauty of the final video that will be produced to somehow disseminate all the knowledge that will be shared today is that it can be edited. But to those of you, apologies. We will continue with the agenda as planned. Very good. Before I introduce the next speaker, I would like to share the eternal gratitude of UNITAR to prestigious academicians that do come and share their knowledge, their time, and their effort to advance a project that, of course, is within our mandate, but also for the benefit of the many. Such a person is, one of those persons is Professor Sapna Sharma, who is the founding academic director of the UNITAR Global Water Academy and a professor at York University. Sapna, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. And when I was envisioning the concept for this panel, I really wanted to highlight the issue of water quality as an important consideration for water security. Because sometimes that's missed when we think about water security. We talk a lot about water availability, but even if there's a country, for example, like Vice President Asif mentioned, Canada has over 9 million lakes, yet we have the most number of lakes than any other country in the world. Yet there are vulnerable communities that don't have access to clean water. And without clean water and infrastructure, water security is still a major issue. I'm very happy that all of our panelists are joining us here today. We've assembled a team of experts across disciplines, sectors, organizations, and I think that really falls within the flavor of why we're here at the High Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. But we also wanted to offer solutions, ecological, scientific, technological, governance, policy solutions, rather than thinking about how so many people live without clean water, thinking about what can we do to move forward. And I'm a scientist and I'm a quantitative ecologist. And basically my research team and I collect data from millions of lakes around the world. And we use complex statistical techniques and artificial intelligence to analyze how environmental stressors such as climate change, habitat degradation, pollution, invasive species impact lakes worldwide. And how we can understand the past to forecast the future. And so what we work on a lot is understanding the impacts of climate change on lake ice loss, warming water temperatures, degrading water quality, changing fish distributions, and ecosystem function in lakes around the world. And I'm not going to give you a statistics lecture today, but I am going to talk about the stories. I'm going to share some stories from the scientific community from the work from the scientific community, as well as my work, on what we've learned about water quality, the drivers of water quality degradation, and maybe some solutions, some ecological solutions to dealing with the issue. And by telling you a story, I'm going to start telling you a story about the lake I grew up on. So I grew up on Lake Erie, which is one of the Laurentian Great Lakes. It's the smallest and warmest of the Laurentian Great Lakes. It's home to 12 million people, and its shoreline is littered with really rich agricultural fields, growing industries, as well as small cities. And in the late 1950s, 1960s, Lake Erie quite dramatically was declared dead because of so much industrial and human pollution and waste. Lake Erie was plagued with huge harmful algal blooms that could be detected in space, and the shorelines were littered with massive fish kills as oxygen levels were extremely low. Industrial pollution was so severe that the rivers flowing into the lake would catch on fire. And at the same time, so we're seeing lakes around the world, including in the Laurentian Great Lakes region, plagued by horrible water quality issues. And at the same time, thousands of kilometers away, a very famous Canadian scientist named David Schindler, he started the experimental lakes area. And he was designing these beautiful whole lake experiments to identify what is the culprit of harmful algal blooms and degradation of water quality. So he chose lakes in northwestern Ontario because they're far from human influence, relatively pristine conditions, and they would conduct whole lake experiments in them. So he chose this lake. It's a very famous lake, Lake 239. Ecologists from all over the world go to this lake to see it because it's in all of our textbooks. And basically what he did was he took a lake, he divided it in half with a huge nylon curtain. And in both halves of the lake, he added carbon and nitrogen. But in one half of the lake, he also added phosphorus. And the lake, that half of the lake that had phosphorus added to it, it turned bright green within weeks. Harmful algal blooms spread like wildfire in that half of the lake. And it was very clearly shown that phosphorus was the predominant driver of water quality degradation. So where does phosphorus come from? Phosphorus is naturally found in sedimentary rock and animal and human waste. Plants and algae need phosphorus to grow. And I'm simplifying this, so whenever you talk to a scientist, you'll hear it's complicated because there's a lot of other nutrients and other factors involved, but I'm going to keep it simple. Phosphorus is the predominant driver of algal and plant growth. However, the issue becomes when there's a large amount of nutrients entering into a waterway, in particular phosphorus. And human sources of phosphorus include fertilizers, industrial and domestic waste, and sewage. And so, as I mentioned, in the 1960s and 1970s, all of these nutrients were being directly inputted into Lake Erie and its tributaries. In fact, in many countries today, this practice still exists, which contributes to widespread water quality degradation and harmful algal blooms in lakes and rivers in those regions. But Canadian policy changed after David Schindler so elegantly had shown that phosphorus was the predominant culprit of water quality degradation. In 1972, the first Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement was signed between Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and President Richard Nixon. The bilateral agreement set out actions and bans on toxic materials and in an effort to improve the physical, chemical, and biological environment of the Great Lakes. And the Great Lakes alone represent 20% of the freshwater supply. These agreements are updated on a regular basis. And these actions directly improve water quality. So limiting the amount of nutrients entering into freshwater system improves the water quality of our systems. However, in the past decade or two, there have been increasing reports of very remote lakes that you can only access either by plane or even just by remote sensing, that have started to experience harmful algal blooms in the last decade or so, where there's no direct human influence in those lakes. And paleolimnologists, they've actually traveled to some of these lakes and taken cores to identify when did these algal blooms start. And there was no evidence of these algal blooms for the last 200 or 300 years, but in the last decade or two, they suddenly appeared. And why? Climate change and climatic extreme events. Cyanobacteria, these are the species that predominantly contribute and cause harmful algal blooms, thrive in warm water and when they have a huge amount of nutrients available to them. More frequent and intense heat waves and storms because of climate change warm the waters and increase the delivery of nutrients into these watersheds for our lakes and rivers. So even some of our largest and coldest lakes, like Lake Baikal in Siberia, Lake Superior in northwestern Ontario, in the last decade, those lakes are experiencing harmful algal blooms. And we have attributed these water quality changes due to climate change, much more important than nutrient inputs for these systems. So what can we do? There's really quite a simple scientific solution. We need to limit the amount of nutrients that enter into our freshwater bodies to improve water quality and reduce the likelihood of harmful algal blooms. So effective nature-based solutions to improve water quality include reducing the use of fertilizer, changing the timing of fertilizer application to limit the amount of nutrients entering into lakes and rivers. So that's something really new that we're thinking about in the scientific field. Like, when does a farmer apply fertilizer on their fields to limit the amount of nutrients that go directly into our waterway? Promoting green infrastructure in urban and suburban environments to reduce stormwater runoff, and conserving wetlands and riparian vegetation. So those are a few nature-based solutions that we can use around the world that are cheap, effective, and relatively simple to improve water quality in our lakes worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Sapna Sharma for the specificity of those examples. That's the whole objective, right? That here we come to hear the experts, so some knowledge is disseminated, some best practices are identified and hopefully shared. Very happy to tell you that at UNITAR, I'm sure also at York University, thousands of beneficiaries, we call them, thousands, watch ex post the videos that we upload, and that's the beauty of technology. Perhaps due to space, we are limited in number when we are face to face, but the universe is the limit when it comes to distance learning. Let me now continue with the agenda and offer the floor to Ms. Diana Kopansky, the head of the Freshwater Ecosystems Unit at the Maritime and Freshwater branch of UNEP. Our colleague Diana is most welcome here.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I'm a little bit vertically challenged here, so you might not be able to see me online. It's like a little head. That's okay. It's important that you just hear my voice. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm really honored as well to represent the United Nations Environment Program and also be part of the dynamic team that supported the development of the UN water system-wide strategy on water and sanitation. And we are on the right track. And I think that we've all heard this sort of global upswell in recognition of and importance of water. It's encouraging, but it's also alarming because we're paying attention to it for very important reasons. We are having incredible impacts where water is facing these impacts of climate change. We're losing wetlands and their functions and nature faster than any other ecosystems. And water pollution is a growing threat to both ecosystems and to people worldwide. 1/5 of the world's water basins are experiencing rapid changes in the area that they're covered by surface waters. And this is indicating that there's an increase in flooding. We have also establishment of new reservoirs and drying up of those trusted water bodies. Research shows us that over the past decade, 9 out of 10 disasters have been triggered by water-related natural hazards. So this combination of climate change with the mismanagement of water resources is really devastating ecosystems. And that's also why the ecosystems that we have always traditionally relied on to provide the buffers, to provide the cleaning, and to provide these areas of storage and release of water, it's been really undermined. The ability of freshwater ecosystems to actually provide the fresh water and the services is actually a huge threat. More than 2 billion people worldwide live in water-stressed countries now. Unsustainable consumption and production is also affecting the hydrological processes and water resource trades and movement around the world. And it's also not only impacting the quality, but also the quantity. We see this through rapid urbanization, through industry, and of course, agriculture. So water is really key to ensuring sustainable development worldwide. And it's also key to achieving each and every one of the Sustainable Development Goals. Not only that, it's key to achieving the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Agreement, and a number of our multilateral environment agreements or our global environmental goals also hinge around water. Freshwater ecosystems as wetlands, rivers, mangroves, and aquifers are a critical part of the global water cycle, global hydrological cycle. They supply, they purify, they protect freshwater resources, and it transfers across basins, across boundaries into the atmosphere and back. And we're losing this connectivity. So not only by taking action to rewild or restore our rivers and our wetlands, we need to actually halt the degradation. We need to stop it. And that is through urgent and important protection and conservation. So while we have this creation of jobs, green and meaningful jobs all around the world around restoration, we also need to invest and also enable green and meaningful jobs and a provision of the multiple benefits and of financial incentives as well for the protection and safeguarding of those ecosystems, which we know so many people, especially Indigenous people and local communities, are the caregivers and environmental defenders for. So we are alarmingly off track to meet SDG 6. And it's because water is overlooked and it's also under-prioritized, under-financed. SDG 6 is the second greatest investment gap of the SDGs. The first greatest investment gap is ocean. So again, water. So let's really see, this is also why the UN system-wide strategy is so timely and important, that we do this uplift of water through collaboration and enable us to also all play our role in contributing our special place in the multi-dimensional and multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary space that we call water, the path of water. Right? We don't need to look at water as a place or space or a resource. We need to watch the flow from the ridge to the river, from the ridge to the reef, and down through the ground where we often ignore it in aquifers and groundwaters. So the current system doesn't adequately understand that or reflect that or value that. And UNEP is working super hard to bring that other piece, the big water. Big water needs to be at the table. We have to stop thinking about infrastructure and channels and the traditional mode of water and sanitation. And that's why the education piece, working on making sure that the research and the findings of science is available and understandable and accessible to policymakers, to decision makers. We really try to make this very easy to understand, but also very relevant to the decisions that they have to make on a daily basis. We have heard Secretary General recognizing that measuring and expressing water's worth and to really call for its incorporation to decision-making. These are fundamental to sustainable and equitable water resource management. And we know IWRM, or Integrated Water Resource Management, is a great approach because it does bring all stakeholders together. It can follow the pathway of water, and it does so well. So this, we see transboundary cooperation is super important, not just transboundary cooperation in the sense of crossing borders, but crossing community boundaries. And many of us have had experience in sharing these water pathways before. And I think we also need to look back at the Indigenous people and how they treated the sharing of water and the pathway of water previously and borrow from that. 40% of the world's population depends on shared river basins for water. And over 250 transboundary river basins exist worldwide. 250 rivers are shared between and among 2 or more nations, and over 50 rivers are shared by 3 or more nations. So progress for freshwater bodies has to take this into account. And this is exactly what is being incorporated as well into the UN system-wide strategy for water and sanitation. And this thought about system-wide thinking, not just keeping water in one place or in one department, but actually bringing into the discussions people from different areas, from different disciplines, and also from different sectors. Because as Sapna was mentioning, nutrient pollution is a huge factor in the health of water bodies. We also know that countries have called for action on water and also special attention to nitrogen. So there's a special action that UN Environment Program is facilitating on nitrogen pollution, moving also and borrowing from our experience on the INC for plastics. So I think that the world is really getting ready for big moves and global decisions and global commitments, which means action for water. And I wanted to also just share that from UNEP's perspective, and I hope that this is most people's perspective now that we really start to understand the full flow of water, the water continuum. We really need to see the environmental aspects of water to be out there, not through just a traditional lens of the the wash approach through the access side, but actually about the availability and health of ecosystem side. So we're really excited to see that be really nicely woven through the UN system-wide strategy, but also through the global goals. And we also heard earlier this year at the UN Environment Assembly resolution where all countries of the world agreed to take concerted action on water, on global water governance, on work, transboundary collaboration at all levels, as well as a concerted effort to scale up action for integrated water resource management and the inclusion and building on the knowledge of communities, traditional or indigenous people or other ways of knowing will be taken account and shared upon. I wanted just to share that as well. Some of the assets are there. All of UNEP's resources are available, and UNEP is a custodian of six of the SDG 6 indicators, one on ambient water quality, one on freshwater extent, and also on the degree of, we use the degree of integrated water resources management as a real lens of, are countries going to do well? Are they going to do well in the future when water is scarce, when climate is impacted, when conflict is at the door? And we really hope to be able to provide with our partners a real uplift on the approach of integrated water resources management, but at all levels, from the community level, across the boundaries of the river, all the way reaching into the ocean, and indeed across political borders. So we do know that there's positive developments. We talked about celebrations today, the UN system-wide strategy. We have also the Freshwater Challenge. It's an initiative that's signed by more than 46 countries, and it's aiming to protect and restore 300,000 kilometers of degraded rivers. And 350 million hectares of degraded wetlands by 2030. That's just going to be an articulation of the existing commitments. We need more. We need faster, we need bigger, and that's the way I wanted to just frame it. We're going to only do it faster and better if we stop competition and move towards collaboration. The age of competition is over, right? I love to see, and I'm a scientist myself, so I've seen that we're moving beyond 4 published names. The last publication that I published in, we had 46. That's a celebration. We need more voices. We need more diverse disciplines also joining up across the research community to help us elevate, because you speak a different language to a different audience. And as long as we start to look at the challenge for water through a lens of big water, we're not going to quite get there. So thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you, Diana, for that call to arms, for sharing the views from the UN Environment Program, but more important for explaining that we all need to be part of this concerted effort. A collaborative approach is what we need. And a particular point that perhaps we can discuss when we open for questions and answers, traditional knowledge lessons, traditional knowledge guidance, the role of indigenous peoples and original peoples, it's rather critical. So allow me to dwell on that when we reach the Q&A. Thank you again, Diana. Now, it gives me great pleasure indeed to invite to the podium a great friend of ours and director of the United Nations Institute for Water, Environment and Health, Dr. Kaveh Madani. Dear Kaveh, welcome.
Thank you. If you don't mind, please give me a 5 minutes notice. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the very kind invitation. Again, congratulations to you. I think it is really exciting to see how this initiative is now getting to this stage. We have seen it since the UN Water Conference and the different events. And it's being shaped, and it's creating an excuse for us within the UN system to also share and do more together. So congratulations to UNITAR, congratulations to York University for being the agent of a good change and a positive change. As we heard from our colleague from UNEP, that so we got to share more and more and do more and more together. There is I'm afraid there is nothing new, like all the ugly narratives and the sad narratives within the water sector are repetitive. We have been talking about this forever. We now have another maybe a deadline to again realize that we are not there yet. So that's the 2030s, and the lack of progress on SDG 6 is worrying us. But it's also, I think, this provides us an opportunity to look back and see what's missing and why we're not getting there. So we released the Global Water Security Assessment in 2023, looked at 186 countries to find out where they are in terms of progress toward SDG 6. And first of all, you see more than half of those countries are in the water secure zone. So more than half of the countries, half of the member states are not water secure, and water security has a broad definition. But more than half of the global population dream about clean water and manage essentially drinking water and sanitation. And then so that's an obvious threat to humanity and progress. It's a very great indication of poverty, and with poverty we know that progress cannot be made. So this is part of this story, and sadly we know that more people die because of the lack of clean water, and because of bad essentially inferior hygiene situation and lack of access to clean sanitation services than disasters. And then, of course, with the wars now, even numbers are no longer having their power, with the number of people being killed, innocent people being killed in wars and conflicts around. But the fact that lack of water is still killing so many people is a big problem. And yet, as the water community, I think we have not been there maybe to highlight these and remind people about this problem. But this is one side of the story, the story of WASH, water, health, and sanitation. And that side of the story, that's the initial progress, initial phase where we connect people to the water grid. But there is another phase after that. 70% of the water in the world is being managed by the farmers. It's in the good hands of the farmers, who mostly are poor in the world. Many of those are subsistence farmers. Water, the main product of the water sector is food, and food must remain cheap in the world. So for the governments to function, and that means that we would always have issues with asking for more investments upstream and in the water sector. And that problem is very important. More importantly, water is tied to employment. So governments need to create employment and avoid unemployment in many regions of the world. And that's why they continue to mismanage the water to avoid unemployment, food insecurity, and all of those things. And this is a big part, the big water story, that part of the story that we are not looking at. Another thing is we have been obsessed with providing more water and with the supply side, but not with the other side and even the downstream side. What happens to water? When we did this study, we realized, for example, in terms of industrial water and industrial wastewater, we only had like 14 countries being monitored by the UN system, 14 countries in the world. So this means that when it comes to the switch and wastewater, our knowledge is very limited. Of course, the situation is better in the domestic water sector and in some places in the agricultural water sector, but still our knowledge is very limited. And we heard stories about Canada. So even wealthy nations, advanced economies are struggling heavily when it comes to wastewater and that. And that is something that we are still missing. Of course, there is a positive side of the story, and I have to wrap up with the positive story. But we have an unprecedented capacity to collect data, to monitor, to measure, to process, to compute. And this is something we didn't have. We have that capacity to help. So when it comes to the interventions, technological interventions, we have an unprecedented capacity. That's a good plus. But when it comes to understanding context and dealing with the political economy problem, dealing with the mismanagement thing, we still are not there. And there is a caveat here. Yes, we have the power to compute, but we still don't understand the water sector very well. So as we make progress in technological interventions, in data collection, in bringing the data together, we have to also improve our capacity to understand the context. And context is very different from one country to another, from one region within one country to another. And unless we understand that, we see that even in some of the countries where the Greens are in power, the Liberals are in power, those who care maybe traditionally more about the environment are in power, then the farmers feel that they're left out of the policies related to climate change, because we have not understood them properly and we have not made them part of the process. And thinking about all these things, I think we also need to work more on understanding the global south issues and bringing those voices to the table to understand why they are not following the easy prescriptions of the global north scientists. Because I think the failure is on our own side. We did not understand those problems properly. We can, through more, I would say, conversations and communication, develop a better understanding and come up with solutions that are enabling them to actually change the course. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Kaveh Madani for, I have always admired Kaveh because he said it as it is. And I think it's important to understand that we are still in need to have a more holistic approach to water as a whole, to have a better understanding of the south-north cooperation. And last but not least, the importance of data. Now, this will be something that, with his permission, I would like to echo and explore more in the question and answers question period will come. So, allow me now to invite Professor Stephanie Gora, the Assistant Professor of the Faculty of Civil Engineering at York University, to take the floor. Professor Gora, it's a pleasure to have you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I know we've had a lot of talk about ecosystem services and big water. I'm going to bring things down a little bit because what I do is water supply. My team works with communities of all sizes, almost exclusively in Canada right now. But we're best known for the work that we do in the Arctic, specifically in Inuit-INWEH. So this is the stretch of area in northern Canada where the population is predominantly Inuit. And this is where people have been living for thousands of years, very distinct culture, very distinct challenges when it comes to water. So before I get into the specifics there, I want to give just a quick review of basically how water gets from sources to tap in general, right? So in Canada, we generally have a surface water or groundwater source. We pump millions and millions of liters out of this source per day. We're usually talking about 250 liters per person per day in Canada. The water is then sent to a water treatment plant. We have a series of different treatment processes, whether they be chemical, like coagulation, chlorination, or if they're physical, like filtration or UV. And the goal here is to remove particulate, to kill microorganisms, to remove chemicals like cyanotoxins that can have negative human health impacts. The water then goes underground into a series of pipes and gets distributed to all the different buildings in the community. When it hits in the individual building, we then call that the premises plumbing. And there's a whole bunch of exciting hazards that can happen inside the building. And then it gets to people and people use it for all sorts of different things, but mostly for consumption, drinking, eating, as well as, of course, cleaning things. So there are other elements though. This is the infrastructure element of the water system. But to make this work, there are other things. There are policies, there's funding, there's governance, there's also operators. So these are the people, these are highly trained people who operate the system. They take care of the water basically from the source to the tap. Where they actually do their job might vary a little bit, but their role cannot be like underestimated. These people are really, really key to how the water system is going to work. So taking this whole thing into consideration, the infrastructure and the people who are involved. In Canada, we call it the multi-barrier approach to safe drinking water. I know that the US EPA here in the US has similar things and individual states adopt them as is appropriate. European Union, various other places in the world have similar ideas. But where we're talking about water supply, not just as where the water comes from, not just how we treat it, but all of the people and processes that go into it. So the thing about the communities that I work in, my team works in really, is that some elements are quite different, right? We can't make all the same assumptions. And the biggest difference is that in a lot of these communities, they're built on permafrost and they do not have pipes in the ground. So the water is distributed by truck. So this is different, right? This is not different. There's lots of places in the world where this happens, but there are not a lot of places in Canada where this happens. So as you can imagine, that introduces all sorts of different hazards that maybe, well, not maybe, that definitely don't exist in distributed pipes under the ground. An even bigger concern is that the water is then delivered to individual buildings where it sits in a cistern or tank. And in the communities that I work in the territories that I work in, it's basically a regulatory and monitoring dead zone. No one really knows what's going on in these tanks, which is terrifying. And the work that I've done previously and that my team is doing right now has shown definitively that this is a huge, huge source of water safety risk. So just getting that knowledge is of course important. But myself, my team, along with people from University of Laval and University of Ottawa, we are doing a lot of work right now to understand what can we do to actually improve water safety inside the tanks. So right now, one of my students is up in Kuujjuaq in Nunavut, which is northern Quebec. And he's going to be looking at the impacts of cleaning. So they're going to be there with people who are hired by the community to clean the water tanks. And they're going to go and see what's it like before and what's it like after. So that's, I mean, it seems like a pretty basic project, but like literally no one has ever done this before. And then I have another couple of students. They were name dropped, so thank you so much, Amir, for that. Caroline Duncan and Audrey Tam, their work is in Nunavut. They're trying to better understand all those extras that go along, right? So we know what the infrastructure is. They've already done a lot of projects looking at that infrastructure, but now they're doing things like talking to different stakeholders, different people in government, the operators, the youth who are interested in becoming involved, oftentimes as operators or water engineers. So I guess that's really all I want to tell you about today. I hope that this is interesting and also that it gives you some insight about an area of Canada that I think a lot of people think of when they think of Canada. I think people think of the far north, they think of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily know the state of water services there and all the different challenges that exist. So hopefully I can, be a voice for the people from there. And that's it. I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you, Professor. You did a great job because that's exactly what we want to do here, to focus on the specific things and examples and best practices and how to galvanize people around it. Let me continue with the agenda and invite next someone that has indirectly supported us and supported UNITAR through his work, the work that I laid on respect. So allow me to invite to the podium Mr. Duncan Ross, the Director of Data and Analysis at Times Higher Education. Duncan, pleasure to have you with us.
Excellencies. I'm not sure if any of you are excellencies, at least formally, but to me, you're all excellencies, and we're at the United Nations. It seems a safe way to start any conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name's Duncan Ross. I'm responsible for rankings, so unfortunately competition. There are a couple very brief things I will say, and I'm saying they're very brief because I'm hopefully going to see the Daily Show being taped. So the first thing to say is that at Times Higher Education, we are absolutely convinced of the importance of the role of higher education in terms of addressing sustainable development goals. And that importance is not just through the research that we've been hearing about, which is absolutely fantastic. And Stephanie, I should, by the way, say thanks for that because you've helped me to understand more about what my partner does. I now understand that she is an on-premises water expert, and that premises is actually hospitals. And the thing that should worry you is she's a microbiologist. So when you think that microbiologists are looking into hospital water, that does start to make me very nervous. And she would describe that as a monitoring dead zone. So that was very helpful. But research is only one part of the way that higher education can play a significant role. The second part is, of course, through teaching. Not just teaching for specific skills, yes, for the microbiologists, for the water experts, but also making sure that all of our students understand the importance of water and how they use water through their daily lives, whatever roles they might have. Whether they raise a family or whether they're unfortunate enough to become a politician, whatever role they have, water will play an important part in that, and how they react to that, how they behave will be critical. It's also really important that universities recognize that they are custodians of significant resources themselves. They may not use the 70% of water that the farms use, but they certainly use a lot of water. I was, in my very, very brief academic career, I worked in chemistry, and you should see how much water a chemistry department gets through in a day. It really is shocking. It's a great solvent for many things. Not the things I needed to clear out of my sintered glass tubes, admittedly, but everything else. And then there's outreach, the work that you do in the communities. And again, we heard some brilliant words there about the work being done in Northern Canada. It's critically important that we help our communities to understand how they can respond to the challenges in the water systems that we're facing, what steps they can take. And universities can play a critical role there. And it's a role not just about teaching, but also very importantly about listening. And when we think about those global north and global south connections, for example, again, that's somewhere where I think universities in the global north can certainly learn a lot from universities elsewhere in the world. Now, in terms of what we do at Times Higher Education, I said we produce rankings. One of the rankings we produce is called the Impact Rankings, and that looks at the performance of universities and higher education institutions in driving the SDGs at each SDG individually. And it requires a lot of work for universities to supply this data. They're not mandated. There's no government out there saying you have to be in the rankings. And so I should pay a special thanks to the team at York who pulled together the data to enable you to be showcased as well as you are in our rankings. But in doing that work, one of the things we have noticed, because we don't tell universities which SDGs they should supply data in, they choose. And one of the things we've noticed, which is really important, is that universities in different parts of the world focus on different SDGs. And it may seem a bit obvious that that should be the case. And yet sometimes we have this idea that governments set priorities and all universities just bow down and accept those. But no, we see through the data that universities in India, for example, are much more likely to focus on SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, than universities in the UK, where it is pretty wet and where we have had sewage systems since the Romans came and invaded us. I'm not bitter about that. It was a long time ago. So that difference is critically important. It's one of the reasons why I say that universities in the global north should look to examples of where universities elsewhere in the world are working to solve their water problems. Because although the challenges that India face are fundamentally different than the challenges that Canada faces, there will be commonalities. Water tankers, the fact that you don't have the same infrastructures in all parts of your country, the challenge of farming and how we address the use of water in the farming cycle. And the final thing I'll say, because I am trying to rush off to go and see the Daily Show, I may have mentioned that before, but I'm really excited about it. I've loved Jon Stewart since he was that high. The other great thing is looking at the document for today, so the agenda for today. Given that we're talking about SDG 6 and the importance of water, I was delighted to see all of the other SDGs lined up along the bottom there. Because SDG 6 is critical across all of the SDGs. Without SDG 6, without clean water and sanitation, how do we have SDG 3, good health and well-being? How do we have SDG 2, no hunger, zero hunger, zero hunger? SDG 2, of course, links to SDG 1, no poverty. How can you have no poverty if you don't have successful farms, if you don't have a successful community? And it goes on and on. SDG 5, the role of women in water. SDG 10, reduced inequalities. All of the SDGs linked together, and SDG 6 is key to them as they are key to SDG 6. So I'll finish once more by thanking all of the universities around the world, all of the higher education institutions for the work they're doing, and encourage you to do more, to think about how you can make it more effective and how you can learn from each other and go on and make the world a better place, because we only have a few years left before 2030. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan, for helping us to keep the big picture in front of us, and for, again, as we did yesterday and the day before, elevating and raising awareness about the importance role of higher education and universities in this quest of ours, Agenda 2030 as a whole, and particularly on the topic today. So we will have some short question and answer sessions, and then Professor Kevin Hall will be delivering the closing remarks. So allow me to open the floor. I know that we are running out of time. Bear with us, please. Just 10 more minutes or so. It's 3:10 in New York. So any questions or comments on the floor? Yes.
Yeah.
Use the mic.
Oh, there's something behind my.
All right, very good.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the panelists, and really nice to hear some examples as well from research. Maybe just, and I'm not sure if you have the answer to this, but I'm curious about your visions for the Global Water Academy and how you maybe envision this moving forward, maybe in the next 5 years. I know UVic's a partner, so we're happy to be involved. And what do you think, what kind of training? And for who? And I'm thinking, adding another layer, I'm thinking about particularly the countries that are most vulnerable to climate security. Thanks.
I'll start and then I'll pass it over to Alex to continue. So that's a great question. And Crystal is here from CFL Victoria. Kaveh is here from UN University. Jennifer's here from Newcastle University. And we're all partners for the Global Water Academy. And the vision, I think, I spend a lot of time thinking. And I spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make the most impact? Because as I mentioned, I'm a scientist and I publish a lot. I talk to the media about my scientific work, but I was just feeling like, how much more can you publish? How many more grants can I get? To the point of like, will this make a difference in the world? And I think for me, that's the reason why I'm so dedicated to the Global Water Academy, because it has the potential for impact and it has the potential to reach people if we can all work together to do so. And to date, we've reached, I think, almost 5,000 people with our panels that we produce, but the more important number is from over 140 countries. And I think that is the power of working with UNITAR, is that we extend beyond our Ontario borders, our British Columbia borders, our Australian borders, and we can reach people from all over the world. And when we host these panels, sometimes we ask our audience members, like, what are issues that impact you? And they tell us, I don't have clean water. How come they're charging me to use rain? Why do we have droughts? What can you do about getting me clean water? Can I drink water from this swamp? And so I think the power of working with UNITAR, working with our collaborators, it gives us access to really fundamental problems and really fundamental issues. And I think that's what drives my vision, is that if we can develop training, if we can develop online courses that are free, so I don't do this for money. I don't even get teaching release, as I mentioned to Jennifer. I do it because I care. And I think we all care. And we care about getting people access to water and getting people free educational resources, so that if someone wants to know, how much chlorine should I put in my refugee water tank, or what can I do to get access to clean water? That's, I think, my vision. And so we're trying to spend more time talking to the people who attend our panels to find out what matters to them. And then what we'll do is reach out to all of our partners to see, okay, this is what matters to people. What kind of expertise do we have on our team to actually provide some free resources and educational resources where we can learn from each other, and also provide some teaching materials to answer those fundamental questions. So that's my vision and my motivation, and I'll pass it over to Alex.
Thank you, Sapna. Since we met Sapna, we have not stopped. So you can see why that passion and commitment help us to advance forward. Just one short echo. I had the privilege of knowing the great Kofi Annan, as we say, at the UN, our former Secretary General. He is now in a better place. He retired from New York to Geneva, and it was a pleasure to interact with him in his retirement. And he used to say two things. One, while he was in office, one UN, one UN, one UN. We are not 37 UNs, we are one UN. The whole UN system should work together. And that spirit is still with us. For those of you that cannot see the rest of the presidium here of these panelist tables, this is one UN. So thank you for echoing that, Sapna. Indeed, is a team effort. But the second thing that he used to say, now he's retired, is that we cannot do it alone. The United Nations cannot do it alone, and this is pretty obvious, but perhaps we didn't have great leaders. He was part of the group called the Elders with Nelson Mandela and several other personalities and statements. And this vision of partnership that Sapna has also mentioned is what motivates us. We are here to find solutions, to disseminate knowledge and best practices, and I thank her again for taking the floor now. Just a couple more questions because we'll need to finish very soon. Yes, if we can give him the microphone.
Great, thank you very much. It's seldom we have so many water agencies all in one place. A quick question. Wonder if any of you are aware of combining energy conservation with wastewater treatment, reclaiming the heat out of wastewater and using that to fund the treatment of wastewater. If anyone knows of that, perhaps at the end, if you would let me know where that is happening.
Thank you very much. Can you, yes, Diana, if you can come here, that would be excellent.
Right. Yes, thanks so much. As I mentioned, I have the privilege of being part of our ecosystems division, but our ecosystems division within the branch, which is marine and freshwater branch, we also have source to sea pollution unit. So we look at the water continuum from the ocean to the coast to the fresh waters, and we also look at waste. We are looking at that in a big picture way about capture, about energy, about recycling, about also, where does the waste go, including, the threats of the microbial resistance, the threats also of viruses. So UNEP looks across the sectors and across the systems. We've been also, trying to transform economies through green economy, also looking at sustainable blue economy, but also One Health. So we look across the whole food system from agriculture to industry to food waste to also reclaiming some of those nutrients. We have a lot of resources that I can tap you into. Thanks so much.
All right, so I'll get really specific again. So yes, actually, we're really excited at York. We have a partnership with a company called Noventa, and they've developed some technology that helps with trying to extract the heat from sewage. So I'm really lucky they tapped me to be part of this, not so much because of the northern work, but because of our team's work with UV. So they're really interested in learning about how we can use UV to minimize the amount of foul. And you can imagine a bunch of wastewater going through a system, lots of really cool stuff happening, but it's still wastewater. It's lots of stuff in there that could get stuck and make some dirtiness. So that's like our personal project, but it's really exciting that York has this opportunity to partner with Noventa. They were the ones who, as far as I understand, sought us out. And it's something that we see in a few places in Canada already. I know that there's an example in Halifax. I think there are a few in the Greater Toronto area, possibly also in British Columbia. So really, really exciting technology, and happy to keep you in the loop with our project at York if you're interested.
Thank you. One more question from the floor, if you can help us with the microphone.
Just a very quick question, actually. So it was interesting that table over there talked a lot about data, not table over this table over here talked a lot about context. So what does, Professor Madani spoke about the unprecedented amount of ability that we have to collect data and the data that we have. So what more can be done to bring the advantages of data and data analytics to bear upon contextual issues? How do people have to work together across what seems to be a pretty big divide?
I wish I had the answer to that question. It's a hard one to answer, in my opinion. But I think what we got to understand is that the ability to collect data is not equal to increased wisdom. So data on itself doesn't lead to producing information, insights, and wisdom. And this is actually one of the challenges that we have at the moment. That our access to data, the ease of data collection results in false confidence. And many people think that because they can measure, they also understand. And this is a challenge in the scientific community, that we see a lot of colorful maps of the world and a lot of indexes and a lot of rankings and so on. No offense to time. but this, so the context is still missing, because the differences in diversity is a problem. The other issue is, I think, lack of standard with monitoring, where, so we rely a lot of times on voluntary contributions and reporting. So in a country we're hosted, Canada, the problem is to collect, like even the federal government doesn't have, cannot collect the data because the provinces are not willing to report back to the federal government. So at all levels we have that. So it's the ability to collect data, but also the willingness to share the data. Because a lot of times, it's the issue of accountability. The moment they share the data with you, you're going to attack them. So that's another issue that we have. So I think I would say we should not develop false confidence. We should be less ambitious when it comes to interpretation of data. You have to understand that there are lots of false correlations and statistical correlations that don't mean anything out there, and that is something to be done. So scaling is the issue. So at what scale we're collecting data and at what scale we're computing, and that's something we need to, I think, do better. So a lot of computational things we do at the global scale might be helpful. Let's say IPCC efforts, or like all those like big sort of global scale modeling. But they're just projections to help us better understand what's happening. A lot of times we mistake them. When we think that they're predictions and forecasts, and they're all wrong. They're there to help us, to irritate us, so we take action. But that's the issue we have. We think these models can explain what's happening at a local scale, and that's wrong. And I think we can learn a lot from COVID-19, right? So a lot of models were there making projections, but there was no model. Still, if we even backcast, we cannot get it right. So forecasting is an issue, and I think that's there are lots of lessons to be learned.
Thank you, Kaveh. So,
Thanks. So this is actually something I think about a lot and I work on a lot, because as I mentioned, we collect data from lakes around the world, and there's actually a lot of observational data. There's on the ground collections by research labs and teams and universities. There's governments, provincial governments, federal governments collecting environmental data. And there's also remote sensing and modeling. So for example, I don't like tooting my own horn, but like we did the very first study where we combined data from what we call in situ observations, where people go collect it, for water temperatures around the world. And then we connected with NASA, who at the same time period when all of our in situ data was being collected, they were collecting satellite-based records, so we could get a global map. And what we did was we make all of our data available open access. And I think that is key. So anytime I publish work, all of that data is available open access on open repositories. There's a huge movement in the US and in Europe to make all of our data available for free, easily accessible, so that anyone can use it, and they do use it to further our understanding of the environment. So I think that for me is the biggest limitation, is the open access piece. And for me, that's also a diversity and equity question, because typically, so we sort of have like another divide. Typically, science is a boys' club. And women and people of color are not usually in that club. And so if you're part of the boys club, you might have access to data and you have access to that information. But if you're not, you don't. So we need open access data. One of my collaborations, we're actually submitting the paper next Friday. We summarized climate data, water temperature data, ice data for 1.4 million lakes around the world, and we're making it all available for everyone to use. And I think that's key, because that's how we get information to do all of these indicators and rankings that and forecasting that we need.
Thank you, Sapna. We'll have one last question or comment. Yes, we'll give you the microphone.
Hi, so my question is, I keep hearing a lot about the private sector from UNHLPF, and how can we incentivize the private sector to commit to better practices and more sustainability? And can it be a good partner in facilitating our goals?
Thank you. I will give it a try because I do work, I'm a UN diplomat, but I do work with the private sector rather frequently and more as time passes. The private sector for us cannot be ignored. The private sector for us is a critical ally. The private sector for us is a necessity. And I'll tell you because I've been with the UN more than 15 years, and we ourselves have changed in our understanding of the private sector. When I came from my government of Latin America, the mantra was private sector always has an agenda. Careful with it. If you end up working somehow or getting financial support or technical support, understand what is the agenda behind. That today is no longer the mantra, thank God. Today the mantra is the private sector is actually committed to bring solutions to humanity. The private sector actually has several resources that are absolutely critically needed at the United Nations, like finance, like technology, but also leadership and experience. Presence, penetration, channels of distributions, and so on. And the last comment I'll tell you is, the question is very important. When we talk about water in a holistic manner, as we are saying that we need to more and more, and from the view of your water, it's a pity that Federico just started another event back at the Secretariat, so he's no longer with us. UN Water understands this. Infrastructure, technology proper, data management, and perhaps the most important thing of all, financing for development. So without the private sector, we are not going anywhere, if I dare to say. And this is something that the UN and many governments, by the way, recognize today. Thank you very much. Before we go to the closing remarks, I'm going to ask a special favor from Professor Kevin Hall, but let me put it in context. UNITAR was created in 1963 by the General Assembly here in New York. It has a mandate to build capacity through training, mostly in developing nations. Last year, we have 520,000 beneficiaries. We're very, very humble and proud at the same time, because I always say it's not 220,000, more than 500,000, 10,000 at a time. It's one at a time. When you actually do capacity building and offer training, it's one at a time. And we have in the room very many higher education institutions, universities that understand that it's one at a time. So when I mentioned that, I simply wanted to recognize the presence here in this room of 4 directors, 3 in the flesh, 1 in the spirit, of the 32 training centers that UNITAR has, 32 CFALs in the CFAL Global Network. Today we have here the directors of CFAL Victoria in Canada, CFAL Newcastle in Australia, CFAL Mashma in Saudi Arabia, and in the spirit, if I may say, from York University, our colleague Ali Asghari is also following us. He's the director of the CFAL Center, the UNITAR CFAL Training Center at this prestigious university, York University in Canada. So, mentioning that, the person that I'm going to offer the microphone to is the father of 2 CFALs. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome to this podium Dr. Kaveh Madani, the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Victoria in Canada.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And I know it's been a long day. I wanted to acknowledge that we're here on homelands, the Lenape people, the Lenape Nation. We should all be thankful that we're here meeting today. Usually you're supposed to wrap up by summarizing what you've heard, and I thought I'd actually do it a little different, because many of you that are here in the room, I've spent the last 3 days with you. I feel like we're family, and so I thought I'd tell you a little bit of a story. When I was 14, I was given a t-shirt, came from Roots, a Canadian company. It says, "Water gives life." Has anybody ever seen that, had one? And so, fast forward, I decided to go to engineering school at Queen's University. I became a water engineer. I spent 45 years working in peri-urban and urban slums, doing point-of-use water treatment systems. And I've been also successful inventing photonics devices to measure bacteria and viruses. And I'm not telling you that because it's not about me. I'm telling you that because I'm disillusioned. I've spent 45 years in this business. And I keep hearing the same thing. And I keep hearing wonderful, amazing people telling wonderful, amazing stories about what they're doing. But we're not moving the bar forward. It's just not improving. And to the presenters today, I want to thank you for your amazing presentations. I think your dedication in what you're doing is absolutely amazing. Just keep going, keep pushing strong. But to government and policymakers, whatever it is you're doing, and unfortunately, you look around, how many people are from government and policymakers in this room? It's not working, right? It's absolutely not working. Water and sanitation is a basic right of life. And that t-shirt I had, water gives life, is absolutely true. And we're not actually, it's not just failing, we're falling behind. And I'll give you a couple of numbers in a second. So we need policy, we need proper policy, we need funding, we need environmental protection, but most importantly, we need empathy. And this is what governments tend to lack. And let me use Canada as an example. And we've all been trashing Canada a bit today, but the Canadians have, and we can't because we're Canadians. It's okay. You know, last year in Canada, we had 600 boil water alerts for fresh water. That's when the government says, hey, don't drink the water unless you boil it. 525 for our Indigenous nations. At the same time, Canada spent $13 billion last year on a battery plant that is being built by Volkswagen, but it spent less than $1 billion on dealing with water in First Nations. So somewhere there's a sense of things aren't right in the global scheme of things. I think also if you look back at 2023, the UN report on water said 2 billion people, which is 1 in 4 people on this planet, don't have access to fresh water. And 3 billion people lack sanitation. Wow, could there be a link between fresh water and sanitation? Seriously, think about it, right? And the governments don't think about that. But more importantly, in 2020, the same report, sorry, 2000, the same report was commissioned. 1.2 billion people lack fresh water. That's actually 800 million less than 2023. And it turns out to be about 1.5 at the population at that time. So the population is growing. We can't keep up with freshwater demand. And at the same time, we're polluting. And so the presenters today, keep going. Don't be a disillusioned old person like myself. There may be hope at some point in time, but more importantly to governments, this is not rocket science. Seriously, this is not rocket science. Freshwater treatment, sanitation is one of the simplest things we do. We use technologies that have been developed 200 years ago. In fact, if you look back in history, the Egyptians were treating water the same way we do today. So it's not rocket science. Step up governments, fund, create the right policy. 1906 was the first global boundary waters treaty. 2005 was the decade of action on water. Where are we today? We're not much further. In fact, we're behind. I'll give you the numbers. So let's break that cycle of, let's call it unconcern, UN concern, unconcern, because governments aren't concerned and we need to make sure we all work together and change that attitude of our governments and policymakers. So thank you for time to, you know, say my things.
There you have it. That's a very clear message, and I sincerely thank you. So to all of you, thank you for joining us today from New York. We wish you the best. And to those of you here in the room in the flesh, thank you so much for taking time from busy agendas at the high-level political forum. The show continues. So we go to the next meeting. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.